Hello and welcome to another edition of Meet the Manager. Here we meet a manager who has achieved a number of strong Fantasy Premier League finishes and also has some interesting views on how to play the game. Today I'm joined by Marc Rubinstein, who has more than 20 years experience in the financial sector, including a stint as partner for one of Europe's largest hedge fund firms. He also has almost a decade's worth of experience as an FPL manager with 3 top 5,000 finishes. Marc, welcome. How are you?
I'm all right, Joe. Hi, how are you?
Yes, I'm good. Excited to get you on. I've been following you on Twitter and we'll talk about this a bit later. But there was a particular thread that you put up that interested me about luck and skill and looking at some of the kind of maths and science behind it. But first of all, let's have a look at your career history. It's up on the screen. So we've got some poor finishes, hope you don't mind me saying that, but also some really great finishes as well. And I like that in these videos because it shows there's examples where you've got it right and you're wrong, and it's always fascinating to find out how people have learnt from that as well. So I think the key thing to look at there, looking at that mix of finishes there in FPL, is to find out a bit about how you think perhaps your experiences in the financial sector and all of those issues around risk and research and those types of things can be transferred into FPL management, and see how you've done it. So yeah, I mean, fire away. I mean, are there some notable links there?
Yeah, well, look, first of all, it's great to be on, and I'm really flattered. You've had some phenomenal guests before me who show much better career histories than mine. I've never quite made it into the top 1,000, but I'm persevering.
Come close.
And as you say, I have a lot of experience in financial markets. And I think there are parallels between financial markets and an FPL. So maybe if I start by just talking about what some of those parallels are, and then we can delve into how I incorporate them into the way that I do play FPL.
Okay, yeah.
The first thing is in both financial markets and an FPL, ultimately what you're doing is creating a portfolio of assets under conditions of uncertainty, which you hope, anticipate, will outperform some kind of benchmark. In financial markets, that benchmark might be the market. In FPL, it's everybody else. They're both relative games. They're not absolute games. The goal in FPL isn't to get the most points possible. It's to get more points than anybody else. And I think, and we can talk about this in more detail later on, but I think people often forget about that. There might be a week where, I think this season, who's the most owned player? Aguero, probably.
Yeah. Maybe
50%, but in previous seasons, you've had players over 50% ownership. And everyone gets very excited when one of those players scores a goal, but actually it doesn't make a blind bit of difference because everyone's got them. The point isn't to get the most points, it's to get more points than anybody else. And that's true in financial markets and FPL.
No, that makes perfect sense, yes.
Carry on. Yeah, in both you're making decisions under uncertainty, the future, who knows what it might hold. And that's really important when we talk about skill and luck. We can come back to that. And actually, if we get more granular, some of the terminology are the same. In financial markets, people talk about value stocks. They talk about momentum stocks. We FPL managers, we talk about value players, and we talk about form players who are the momentum players. I think from memory, the best value player, I think in FPL of all time, in my view, is probably Andy Carroll when he was at Newcastle. I think he started the season at about 5 million. Might have been 4.5. It's 5 million, and he just went on a phenomenal goal scoring spree. And we've even in financial markets we talk about story stocks. There are some stocks which build up a fervor builds up around them. A great example recently, there's a US-based cannabis stock called Tilray, went up tenfold over the course of the summer, just on the excitement about the decriminalization of cannabis in the US. And actually, the company wasn't making any money, wasn't doing anything. It kind of reminded me when I was reading the stories about this of, kind of pre-season in FPL, where we talk where a player kind of, further, whether it was, Jota pre-season.
Yes.
This year, I can't remember. There was a really great example a few seasons ago. You'll probably remember more than me.
It may be. I mean, I think that one example would be Michu at Swansea. He came with quite a good track record. And he had a really good early pre-season, and so he became, as you said, like a story player. There was a lot of expectation, and amongst the fancy football scout community, a lot of people had Michu, but he was really quite low owned as well. I guess another example. I mean, it's those kind of examples really, but it can go wrong as well. I mean, I seem to remember Danny Graham at Swansea having a great pre-season.
Yeah.
Who's Danny Graham? People will ask now. Well, exactly. He didn't really do much. I guess there's that element as well. That's been the example you gave is a financial market success at the moment. But are there any? I guess it's that cases where you've got to understand, who's going to be a Michu or an Andy Carroll, and who's going to be a Danny Graham. Are there any kind of ways that you can differentiate between like that success and failure?
Well, yeah. I mean, we can. I guess value is critical in this sense. And that's why Andy Carroll, I think, was a really, really good example, because the risk of owning him at 5 million was very, very low, and then the opportunity to get him in subsequently was very, very high given his valuation. One of the things that one of the principles that kind of drives my playing style is flexibility. I think it's really important. And again, this concept in financial markets of optionality, of retaining option. The value of an option is often understated in the real world, and that value of optionality, I think, is really, really high. And the way that I kind of incorporate that into the way I play is to really think about team structure, and create a structure which retains maximum optionality for the future.
I mean, looking at some specific examples, if you can kind of remember back to some of those 3 seasons there, those top 5,000 and 2, like right on the edge of the top 1,000. Are there any particular examples you can give of either players or just things that you did in those seasons where you incorporated some of those things that we've been talking about the financial sector?
Yeah, so there are 4 frameworks. I've spent a bit of time thinking about this. Obviously, I think there are 4 frameworks that one can extract from the financial markets and use them to play FPL. And there's no doubt when I think back on those 3 seasons that I really kind of embraced all of these frameworks. Okay. So if I'll go, maybe we can delve into them as you wish. But the first one, I think, is it's important to have it. It's important to look for edge. And I'll just basically give the preview now. We can delve into it if you like. But in financial markets, we talk about 3 sources of edge. There's a kind of an informational edge, an analytical edge, and then a behavioural edge. And certainly in those seasons, I was really focused on analysis. Okay. Maybe more than other seasons. So literally just the amount of work that I did in those seasons. The numbers of spreadsheets I cobbled together in those seasons was higher than it was in subsequent seasons, just due to kind of constraints on my time and so on. Okay. So that's one. Second one is, and actually this is one I've employed across all seasons, is diversification. Very, very important in financial markets. It's kind of a cornerstone of finance portfolio theory. We can talk about that later. Yeah. The third one is, just by way of preview, this is really interesting. It's basically, everyone talks about winning all the time, but it's also important not to lose. Mm-hmm. So, by that, people, in FPL circles, we call it cover. Sometimes it's talked about in terms of it being dull, but not losing points can be as important as winning points.
So, I mean, an example of that, just thinking immediately this week, and I know these interviews aren't necessarily time sensitive, so this may be in the past, some others, when they will get to see it, but it's basically, Richarlison is an interesting one. He's very well owned. I don't own him. I know a lot of people do. Plus, a lot of people who are above me in the rankings plan to captain him as well. So that getting him in isn't necessarily a case of winning, it's a case of not losing. So if I get him in, I have covered, as you said, I've covered off that. So if he scores 15 points, some people get 15 from him, some people get 30 from him. I know I'm going to get those points. But if I don't cover him off, I could potentially lose out somewhere between 15 and 30 points to people. So is that a kind of example of what you're talking about there? About
it is. And but I mean, it is an example. So the way I would play the game is actually it's a risk averse. Well, so I divide the season. Well, I wouldn't divide the season into two. So I think there's one other observation I've got is those seasons where I have performed very, very well. In all three of those cases, I ended the season at my high watermark. Oh. So I went out at the highest ranking that I'd enjoyed over the course of the entire season.
Oh, really? Okay, so I mean, the value of your FPL stock was at its peak.
Exactly. And I think the reason, and I would divide the season into two, and not two equal components, but people often talk about kind of the first few weeks being important in terms of team value and accumulating team value. So put that to one side. I think there's an end game to the season as well. At the end of the season, some of the rules, they change. So, teams, maybe number one, maybe even number two positions in the Premier League are kind of secured. And the rules kind of change. People are fighting for different players, teams are fighting for different things. There's a lot of rotation. The rules kind of change. And historically, what I have done is taken more risk in the end game of the season than throughout the rest of the season. So for most of the rest of the season, coming back to this point about not losing points, that's been my philosophy. So it's captaining the favourite captain. It's retaining that kind of team flexibility, that team structure. It's not taking hits. We can delve into that in more detail if you like as well.
It struck me there's comparisons there with, say, for example, a pension fund. So at the end of a pension, usually when you get pension advice, they say towards the end of it, starts off there's going to be some riskier moves, and then by the end of it, they're going to be in the safest hands you can find. So once again, same. Would that be a kind of valid comparison there?
Yeah, exactly. And it's true. It's true in a lot of sports. I was reading recently about tennis. We all think tennis as being one game, but actually there's some research. And there's two different games. There's professional tennis, which Djokovic plays, and there's kind of amateur tennis, which I don't know what your tennis game is like, but the kind of tennis that me and I presume you play. And with professional tennis, it's all about winning points. And amateur tennis is about not losing points. The winner in amateur tennis is the one that puts the ball into the net less, hits the ball out of bounds less, double faults less, and so on. And that's I think FPL shares a lot of those similarities. It's not, you don't have to, at least in the first let's say 30 game weeks, take excessive risks. And there's this compulsion to, that moonshot, that amazing, obviously it tells a great story, that incredible differential transfer, that differential captain pick. But you hear about it when it goes right, but more often than not, it doesn't go right. And I'm not sure it's a necessary ingredient.
So are there, just to go back, so we've got edge, diversification, essentially cover as well.
Yeah.
And that fourth point again?
Yeah, the fourth one is this thing that you introduced me on, which is this idea of skill and luck. I'm fascinated by this idea of skill
Okay.
and luck.
So yeah, looking at that thread that first got me to know about your thoughts about FPL was about skill and luck, and it was very much looking at issues like ownership and the increasing popularity of FPL as well, and how that's affecting the amount of information that's available, and also the whole skill luck divide in the game. So I'll put a link up in the article about this. But yeah, do you want to just kind of run through all that now for the viewers?
Yeah, this idea of skill and luck is something that fascinates me. It's obviously it's prevalent in financial markets. Nobel prizes have been awarded on this very idea. But people often forget about it in day-to-day life, just the importance of the role of luck. There's a basic human trait whereby if anything goes right for us, it's down to our kind of personal genius, and if anything goes wrong, it's bad luck. And yeah, you see that in FPL all the time. The player that the defender that subbed off on 59 minutes, ever remembers that, and just what excruciating bad luck it is. Doesn't remember the player that maybe subbed off at 61 minutes. The dodgy assist that isn't given. The dodgy assist that is given, and so on. So you've got this idea, you've got this kind of preponderance, this role that luck plays in financial markets, in life, and in FPL as well. And any competitive pursuit, and it comes back to something I was saying earlier, this idea that this is a competitive game, it's not an absolute game. In any competitive pursuit, it's going to be a function of a bit of skill and a bit of luck. So you've got extremes. One extreme, you've got the 100-meter sprint, let's say. I could, face the starting gun alongside Usain Bolt, and a million times out of a million, he's going to win. And I'm not. That's one extreme of skill, pure skill. And there's an extreme of pure luck, which might be, luckiest man, Justin Bieber. I don't know, whoever the luckiest man alive is.
Well, Justin Bieber's pretty lucky to get where he is based on what he is.
Yeah, so, yeah. Well, there you go. So, I'm playing roulette against him, and, it doesn't matter, pure luck, equal chance. So you've got the spectrum of activity. And FPL sits somewhere in between. There is skill involved, undoubtedly, and there's luck involved as well. One of the key features of anything where there is a mix of skill and luck is that typically over the long term, the luck will cancel out to a degree. So, the defender that subbed off after 59 minutes, in game week 3, come game week 30, and actually 38 weeks is too short to look at this idea over. You need, many more weeks than that. But you'll be compensated for that further down the line. So it might even out. What's interesting is that, if you take it as read that any performance is a function of, skill and luck, what's happening is that skill is going up. And actually, I don't know. I was trying to do some numbers to see if that's true for the best player in the world. One way I was looking at this was has the FPL champion each year fared against the dream team? I need to delve into that. I don't know if he's getting better relative to the dream team or not. But the point here is that however the champion is doing, everybody else is catching up.
Right.
It's kind of democratization of skill. I was talking about edges before, and the first edge is informational edge. I first played fantasy football in 1996. Didn't play for 10 years subsequent to that. 1996, on a trading floor in the city of London, in a bank. The internet was barely invented. It was, we had to fill in, newspaper coupons and post them back, or may have faxed them. But the point is we had no information. There was no information. Anybody who was going to win that game then, if they had a modicum of information advantage, then their advantage was just enormous. Now that's all gone away. All the information is available. Second edge is analytical edge. And what's really interesting over the past I think it's quite recent. It's only the past couple of years, really, is that informational edge, analytical edge, has now been kind of democratized. So Fantasy Football Scout does great stuff, and being a member provides great value, given the access to Opta and all of the goals imminent tables, whatever it might be. But a lot of that stuff is now available. Expected goals has really taken off. A lot of these analytical tools are now available. They're free in many cases. They're freely available, and that's a big change. So everyone's got exposure now to information and analysis. The third edge is behavioral. Let's park that to one side for a sec. We can come back to that. But the point is, skill has improved, and you can see that very clearly. What I showed on that thread on Twitter was that the variance of players are shrinking. And put it in simple terms, the gap between the number 1 player and the number 1,000 player is shrinking. So it's happening, and it's not unique FPL. It's happening in, I put it up on the thread as well. It's happening in the marathon. A new world record actually was made in the marathon, the men's marathon, a few months ago in Berlin. And that makes news. That's great. But for me, a more interesting news story is the fact that everyone else is catching up.
Yeah.
And it's happening. It's happening in the stock market, and it's happening in baseball as well.
Yeah, I think that's something you would kind of expect to happen, but I don't think a lot of people think about it, in that it's essentially getting much harder to win FPL because you've got many more good competitors against you because they've got access to all that information, and that didn't happen before. But just looking at some of those seasons that you have had where it didn't go so well. So all of that we've spoken about here, are there any examples you can give where you perhaps think the way you think now you might have done a bit better, or are there just any specific examples where you kind of almost didn't apply some of the rules that you've already spoken about?
Yeah, so the big one is so actually just picking up on this thread about skill and so actually the way I think that the way to kind of reconcile it all is long-term planning, and given the role, given that in any given week luck is going to have a big impact, the way to reconcile for that is to plan and think more long-term. And the best the best proxy I think for kind of long-term planning is fixtures.
Okay.
Just from where we're sitting now, thinking ahead, I don't know, game week 19, game week 20. I don't know. Is Martial going to be in form or not? I don't know. Is a player, is he going to be fit or not even then? I don't know. What I do know is that game week 19-20, Manchester United have got 2 back-to-back home fixtures. We know this now. We knew this back in July. And they're pretty good home fixtures. So I think so coming back to your question, often it's easy to kind of, and there's a bit of luck in here as well, because you may have an injury that you've got to solve for, multiple injuries you've got to solve for. But certainly in those seasons where I've done best, it's been planning using fixtures many weeks in advance. Okay. I would know now what moves I would want to have done in game week 19 and 20. Okay,
so that's occurred in those seasons. We've seen the results of them, where you're getting on the edge of the top 1,000, top 4,000, and those seasons where perhaps whatever obviously we've got lives as well as fantasy managers. Whatever's going on, you just don't have that time to do that type of research that to give you that edge. That's where it starts to kind of fall apart slightly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, there's 2 things. So that's what. Actually, there's another non-FPL reason, which is so I'm a Liverpool supporter, and there's a kind of a inverse correlation between Liverpool's performance and my FPL performance. So, and I don't know if this is common. I haven't heard any other Meet the Managers talk about this.
Well, famously, the manager that won, Ben Crabtree,
Yeah,
as an Everton fan, would not have any Liverpool players in his team,
yeah,
which worked out
okay,
absolutely fine when Lukaku was spearheading the Everton attack,
yeah, yeah,
and Liverpool weren't quite so good pre-Salah.
yeah,
Salah comes along, Ben's nowhere to be seen the following season.
yeah. It's very funny.
He's an extreme example
Yeah,
of
yeah.
having won it as well. But yes, it is quite common. I'm a Brighton fan, but I try not to let it get to me. Partly because I
No,
kind of
I
know
guess
they're
I'm
not
making a slightly
Liverpool
different point
standard.
because you're right. I mean, I wouldn't, I wouldn't let it interfere with the way I play and the players I choose. Um, but so for example, last season I was kind of jetting off to Rome and Kiev, and so I guess I had less time.
Yeah.
I had less mind share for FPL. Given how well Liverpool were doing, and when I've done well those seasons, the first, when I've come just outside the top 1,000. I think the first time it was the Roy Hodgson season, and the second time it was kind of Brendan Rodgers' last season. So it was kind of when things aren't going that well in real football for me, I'll spend more time, and I think that's what it comes down to: more time,
I
more
see.
planning on
Just have more interest in it as well, I guess, as well, because you're.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, so I did want to test if this is the case. So I was looking through the Hall of Fame. Guess how many Manchester City supporters there are in the top 25?
Oh, I don't know. Tell me.
None.
None.
None. There are
Really?
none.
Really?
So yeah. So
So
I
that's
mean, there's lots
well,
of other
there we
reasons.
go. There, I mean, that is actually quite unusual because you would expect, yeah. So maybe there is that correlation between just investing your time more in fantasy football when your own team is not doing so well. Obviously, as a Brighton fan, that's an absolute brilliant edge that gives
Yes.
me,
Yes. Yes.
especially when they weren't in the Premier League as
Yes.
well. No, there's some great points there. I mean, let's move on to this current season. So you're well in the top 100,000, so you're in a good position to march on into the top 10,000 and beyond. And we've got up your team from the previous game week there. So just a little bit about. I've had a look at the FPL Statistico site. I do urge people to have a look at it. It just means we can really delve behind some of the moves that players have made. So this season you played 3-4-3 for the most. You've captained Salah and Aguero almost exclusively, with just Hazard once, and you did well from him then as well. And you've only taken one hit as well. All of that looks to me, that is the behaviour of a manager that plays it safe and is aware of risks and perhaps being risk averse. They've decided to be risk averse. Would that be is that a good indication of how you play, or have in previous seasons have you taken more hits and been more keen to take more risks?
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. It's also important, I think, to actually maybe coming back to this third edge, is behavioural edge, because this kind of feeds into the answer to the question. There's a lot of people have spoken about all these kind of behavioural stuff. Nick Triggerlips has spoken about it. Who Got the Assist guys have spoken about it. But there's, about the negatives, the things to avoid. But the thing not to avoid is it's kind of behavioural thing. Some people find easier than others. Kind of adaptability. Sometimes things change.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen that this season with defenders.
Okay.
So actually, your point about 3-4-3, I think I probably played, and I haven't looked at the stats, but it kind of feels, I think I played four at the back more this season than probably in all of maybe not last season, but certainly the season before put together already. So this idea of adaptability, and changing the way you play is based on the evidence around you, is important. So that's one of the features for this season, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, looking at that team there as well. One of the weeks you played four at the back there as well. And I know for myself, I traditionally go 3-4-3, but I've also done 4-3-3 and
Yeah.
4-4-2 much more frequently than I've ever done before, just simply because there's too many good defenders. Doherty, for example, at Wolves is a player that if Wolves have got a good fixture, you play him. And if you've got Alonso, Robertson, Trippier, Mendy, whoever as well, you just got to play 4 at the back because they're probably going to get you more points. But looking at the team,
Although the Wolves thing, actually, the Wolves thing's interesting
Okay.
because again, coming back to kind of it's risk aversion. It's not risk aversion. It's just kind of calculated risk. I mentioned earlier on this idea of diversification. So for me, one of the aspects of diversification is not doubling up on the defence.
Okay.
Now this season, I did double up on defence with Bennett and Patricio. But I never played them both. I lost a lot of points not playing them both when Wolves were keeping those clean sheets. So that's, I guess, but over the long term, I think that kind of diversification, certainly in prior seasons, has been a benefit.
Yeah, because you've given yourself another option there. You've got Balbuena, essentially, would be your Bennett or your Doherty. So when West Ham...
Right.
And you've looked at the fixtures there. West Ham have good fixtures. And at the same time, you still get those clean sheets. So that comes back to that edge of around behaviour and coverage, really. That cover pick. So Patricio is your cover pick there as well, and get bonuses. So, I mean, looking at that lineup that you've got there, you've got Maddison there, who may or may not come back, but essentially was out. And you've got Højbjerg there. Højbjerg's a bit of a non-player, isn't he? It's just kind of, you don't really want him ever to come on because you're just going to get 2 points. But looking at the rest of your team there, what changes can you see making over the coming game weeks, and who can you see coming in to replace them?
Well, so right now, I've got 2 frees over the international period, which is good. It always seems, who knows why? I know club managers have complained about this before, but kind of the propensity for injury always seems higher over an international break than over a typical 2-week period. But actually, in this case, a lot of these players were injured going into the international break. But I've got some injury issues. So I've got Maddison, Trippier, Ings, question mark still. So I've got some question marks. I've got 2 frees. The one that I am fairly confident I am going to do is Maddison out for Richarlison. And it's interesting that he is so high up this week on the captaincy.
Well, I mean, that just draws us back to what we were originally talking about Richarlison, and I can see why you got interested then, because that is an exact example of the type of move that bringing in all of those things that you've already spoken about. You've got the analysis, the information, the coverage, your behaviour as well. All those edges are coming in, and it might seem I don't know, just too simple to say you've got all of those edges and you've decided to get Richarlison in, but you have to put those things together to make that decision, and that's a wise one. I think that's a very wise one, because you're not going to lose. You might not win, but you're not going to lose.
Yeah, exactly. So, dull it may be, but I guess it allows you to stay in the game for that flourish in the well, actually, there's 2 periods of potential flourish. One is the Christmas period, which is critical, and 2 is as I said earlier, is that end game. The last few weeks.
Okay.
And the Christmas period, actually, it'd be very interesting to see, the most successful FPL players and how they have done over that Christmas period.
And what other players, looking at that Christmas period, because I'm presuming this is one of those seasons where you have got that information and analysis edge, and that you have looked at those the fixtures coming up over Christmas. I know you obviously highlighted Martial there as well, but are there any other players that you're either considering or you think you might come in based on that analysis that you've had over the festive period?
I think so. I guess we've all. I mean, I don't have a question mark right now around Mendy, because I don't have him in my team. Currently, but I think inevitably at some stage we need to look at him again. and then it comes down to fixtures. I think we've had enough weeks now to know who the top players are. I think it's unlikely. I'd never say never, but is anybody going to come out of the woodwork now? Who isn't on our kind of current watch lists? Fixtures aside, probably not. Actually, Martial, as I say, I've alluded to him, is a good example. I've been struggling with the strikers this season.
Yeah.
I was on Mitrovic, and then he performed badly, and I switched him into Arnautovic. I was on Josh King and then got rid of him and brought Ings in. I've kind of been chasing a little bit those kind of budget strikers. So it would be good to kind of identify.
Well, I often find they're the kind of slightly more risky investments, even to go back to kind of the financial sector as well. These are the kind of up and coming firms who could end up being the next Apple. Or they could end up.
That is right. That's right. But that can happen. That's right. Or that can happen across the field.
It could be a Sinclair, whatever it was that he.
Yes.
Sinclair C5. That was it.
Okay.
So it could be that, but we don't.
I thought you were talking about Sinclair, who was a midfielder.
No, it was Clive Sinclair, who was in the middle of a little car.
Yeah.
Along the curb. But yes, no, that's an example. I often find those players, those third strikers, are the ones that can get you that kind of kudos, and it could be like you were there first. And you mentioned a golden example of that. Andy Carroll, when he was at Newcastle, was you were right, was a fantastic purchase, because he was great all season while he was at Newcastle, and enormous value. We've had Harry Kane in that role as well, of course, with that really cheap one, and of course Vardy and Mahrez as well. Vardy in particular was very cheap that season, and really worth his money. But yes, it can be risky as well. Going back to some of the less risky players, though, you've got Salah and Aguero. Now, you've captained Salah and Aguero most times. We've been blessed early on. They have rotated extremely well. They seem to have favourable home games, alternate weeks. And pretty much anyone who's captained both of them has had a return every week. I've never known anything like it. To go back to going back to that thing about luck and skill, really. In a way, that's a skill of just having a strategy, sticking with it, and it's worked out. And it's a very low risk strategy. Yeah. That's changing now. Suddenly they're away both the same weeks, are home the same week. Suddenly their home fixtures aren't as good as they perhaps were. They're not playing Cardiff anymore or Fulham. Do you see that changing? Do you see you taking a bit more risks with the captaincy, or do you think you might still nevertheless stick with a kind of Salah Aguero most weeks?
So to me, I think the important thing is, and again, thinking back to those seasons where I haven't performed that well, it's consistency of process. So because what that does is it creates discipline. Mm-hmm. It provides a kind of a filter for making decisions, and it's the consistency which avoids not just the point chasing, mm-hmm. but also the kind of chasing of style. Mm-hmm. And it recognises that luck will be pervasive on individual weeks, but the way to navigate that, I think, is to have a process and stick to it.
Okay, well, it's a process that has been working as well. I mean, some of the dynamics of that have changed. As I said, they don't dovetail quite as nicely now, but nevertheless, they are both great players and they can score against anyone.
In that case, I got the wrong one. It was game week 2. I got the wrong one, but
was that the week where Aguero?
Yes.
There was a newspaper report saying that he might be out. So that's an example where your foresight to look at the analysis, look at the information. I did exactly the same thing. Was actually a hindrance, and those that were blissfully ignorant enjoyed those strong returns. That was an example. I don't think that will happen too often, though. I think mostly information is power. I think with that.
It's a good point. You see it kind of bib theory on who the starting 11 might be. Often, I mean, there's a lot of this idea, and again, coming back to financial markets, you went from a period. I said I started playing FPL in just 1 or 2 seasons in 1996 where there was no information, and now we've gone to the other extreme, and you do have information overload. So information overload is a challenge that we all face now in FPL, and I've seen it in financial markets as well, where even 10 years ago, information wasn't prolific, and come back to this idea of edge, going out and finding information was a source of edge. Now we all suffer from information overload, and one of the lessons that I've learned from financial markets is the form of kind of triage. Look at all the information that's coming in. Is it knowable information? Is it relevant information? And then, kind of adopt some sort of filter. And come back to your example of the Aguero injury one. There's a lot of noise. It's not. That's particularly now we've got the vice captaincy solution. There is a lot of noise out there. A lot of noise out there. No, I didn't choose him. It wasn't for that reason.
Yeah, no. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I think we've got a good insight there about those combinations of how the theories within the financial sector, as well as the fantasy football sector, if we can call it a sector, kind of dovetail quite nicely. There's been some good tips there as well, and it certainly made me think a little bit differently, particularly about luck and skill. And how to get that edge as well. And I think that Richarlison example is a great one. But for now, Mark, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show, and good luck with the game week and the rest of the season.
Thanks, Joe, and to you.